This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and today's interview is being recorded in front of a live audience here at the 2016 Limmud Conference in Birmingham, UK. My guest today is a veteran women's rights lawyer, formerly with the American Civil Liberties Union, and since last year, a fellow resident of the big steam, our very city, Tel Aviv. Ariela Migdal, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what sort of cases does a women's rights lawyer deal with?
Well, probably my best-known case was when I represented 4 women who had served in ground combat in the American wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were suing the U.S. Secretary of Defense, who had a rule in place saying that women could not serve in ground combat units. And when these 4 women came back from Iraq and Afghanistan and read the rule and realized they had just done what the rule said that they technically couldn't do, they were perplexed. They had job titles like logistics officer or email administrator, but in reality, they had been what was called attached to or added on to ground combat units because the military basically needed women to fight alongside these infantry units. But they had this rule in place that said that they technically could not do so. And so the women went ahead and sued the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, and their claim was this rule was the last piece of American law that said outright women may not do such and such. There are still plenty of ways in which American law institutionalizes discrimination, but there's no other piece of law that simply says women can't do somthing. So that was probably my favorite.
So it was a principled claim rather than a practical one, because they had done what they weren't allowed to do, but they ended up doing it at the end of the day.
Right, and so it was my only case that, even though I worked for the American Civil Liberties Union, which is known for bringing constitutional cases, it was my only case where the claim was really based on a principle in the Constitution. Most of my other cases involved people who were discriminated against in housing, in employment, in education. But this was one where it was really the core principle of may women do something. And it resonated for me as a Jewish woman because we have, still some setups like that today.
How often does it happen that women are discriminated against in housing, in employment, and the other cases, more run-of-the-mill cases that you dealt with?
It happens a great deal, but it's less blatant. So you have the kind of de facto discrimination. For example, in housing, you'll have the problem that poor women will very often be kicked out of housing, especially government-subsidized or public housing, because of the actions. For example, victims of domestic violence will get kicked out if their abuser causes some sort of harm to the property, or women will get kicked out of public housing because of claims about what their children are doing. And so it's that kind of more subtle discrimination. In the employment realm, we represented a whole bunch of women directors in Hollywood. Women direct only a tiny, tiny percentage of the top films in Hollywood. But again, there's no law that says this has to be the case. In fact, the law says quite the opposite. People should be treated equally. It's more of the systems in place that
But what can you do about
way.
it legally, from a legal point of view?
So it's much, much harder. In the case of the women directors in Hollywood, Hollywood is by far the biggest entertainment production factory of any entertainment. It's much bigger than Israel's entertainment industry. The television that's created in Hollywood is seen all over the world. The women direct only about 14% year after year of the episodes on television, just to give you one number example. But it's very hard to challenge this because each film is its own employer. They usually create a separate company. And so what these women directors did, these were women who had been directing for years, many of them, and they kind of got together and along with the ACLU, and they asked the employment discrimination agencies to conduct an investigation. It wasn't a case of one woman suing her employer, because the feeling was that wouldn't really get at the problem. It would be very difficult to prove that in any given case discrimination.
Do you think that America is more progressive than other places on these issues? Is there better legal redress for that in other democracies?
I think it's very difficult to compare because in many ways America is way behind. You know, people in the UK are usually very surprised, for example, that American women can get pushed out of their jobs when they're pregnant. They don't get sick leave necessarily. They don't get maternity leave. If they work for an employer with fewer than 50 employees, they don't even get their job held for them for 12 weeks under our American Family and Medical Leave Act. I'm living in Israel now. Israelis are absolutely appalled that American women are not entitled to these pregnancy and post-birth protections. So they just can't believe we live like this.
Mm-hmm. Is it something that can be done, can be attacked from a legal campaigning group?
I think I'm a lawyer. I think a lot can be accomplished by suing and litigation, and that's what I do. But there is a limit. And so for things like paid family leave, those have to be organized on the local level, the state level. It's been passed in a number of U.S. states so that if you have a baby or adopt a baby or other reasons, you can get paid leave. But generally, the American workplace is still organized very much around the model of the male without a disability who never gets sick.
Mm-hmm. How many of your clients were Jewish? Were there any exclusively or predominantly Jewish issues that you had to deal with while working at the ACLU?
No, in fact, I did not have very many Jewish clients. Most of the cases that we did, honestly, were often cases that also involved a component of racial discrimination or religious discrimination. One example I'll give is I represented a number of Muslim women who were challenging prohibitions on wearing their head coverings in various settings. So I had one woman who she was arrested for not having the correct train ticket and brought to a county jail. The whole way there, the policeman asked her if she was in favor of the September 11 attacks. And when she got there, they had her taking off her headscarf, which was quite traumatic. And we also worked on a case regarding a Muslim policewoman. I don't know how it is in the UK because I think it's more accepted here to wear hijab at work or things like that. But so that had a component of religious discrimination. I did have to ask myself why no Jewish women were coming to us with these cases, since many Jewish women also cover their hair, but they're not subjected to that same Islamophobic kind of discrimination that my clients were facing.
Mm-hmm. But then again, it poses another question to you as a feminist, as a women's rights lawyer and campaigner. By actually defending these women, the Muslim women, you're basically defending the patriarchal oppression.
We got that comment a lot. We got many people saying, why are you basically being apologists for, Tehran or these other regimes that force women to cover various parts of their body and their hair? And my personal take as a feminist is that women should not be told what to wear or not to wear. So for many of the women who are covering their hair, especially Muslim women in America, it's part of a political identity, also in Israel, actually, in Turkey and many other places, and that's how they're going to be expressing their identity. And I can tell you that my clients, nobody was forcing them to do this. This was part of a political and religious way that they were expressing themselves, and that was what we were all about.
Well, what kind of discrimination do you face, not as a lawyer, but as a Jewish person living Jewish life? What really are the most burning issues for women within a religious Jewish lifestyle?
So this is discrimination against women within the Jewish community?
Yeah.
Well, in the Jewish community, we've made a lot of progress, but we're dealing with a religion where so many of our sources of law and our texts and our communal structures have so long been authored by men that we're in a moment of women playing a tremendous game of catch up and still knocking down barriers. And we're at Limud UK right now, we have incredible women scholars here who wouldn't have had access to the Beit Midrash a century ago, but right now we have so many women rabbis, scholars, professors, and they're really making a lot of headway. And women are also still knocking down barriers in the ritual realm. Many women, I've seen women read Torah for the first time in a particular shul. I've seen that happen about 10 times. It's always mind-blowing because they're still doing something that's the first. I've seen women who have sat in synagogue for decades come up and have an aliyah to the Torah for the first time. It's always inspiring.
Mm-hmm. But that's something that we've accomplished. What remains to be accomplished, do you think?
Well, I think we still have, like every community, we still have the leadership gap. So you'll look at, there was a studies done on American Jewish institutions, I don't know how it is here, where you'll have this sort of fellow at the top making a lot of money, and then a whole bunch of women, whether it's women teachers and a male principal, or women social workers in a male-run agency. Of course, we still have that problem, and we still have, as in the U.S. generally, we have the gender pay gap, the wage gap, and that plagues our Jewish institutions as well. And then besides that, I think just the idea of women being empowered to own the tradition, that's why things like Limud are so exciting, because I think very often young girls will read the materials and see that all the rabbis' names seem to be men and wonder where they might fit in and whether they will someday be delivering the sermons, the responsa answers, the interpretations that other people will be studying. So that's still a challenge.
All right. We have a bit of time for questions from the audience. Has anyone got a question?
So you've obviously achieved a lot in your career. What would you say was a real defining moment or changing point for you?
Thanks. I guess a big defining moment for me was realizing, and I think this happens to me in almost every case, how many vast worlds women inhabit, and in each of them there are some common threads of sexism. And I'll go back to my case about representing the women in the military. Unlike in Israel, where so many people serve in the military, in the United States it's a small proportion of the population that even serves in the military, but it's a very specific subculture. These women have grown up with military fathers, brothers, and it's a whole planet. They speak in a jargon. For the first 6 months of interviewing women, and I interviewed about 100 women who had served in the military, I didn't understand a word they were saying. They used so many acronyms. They had deployed to Iraq, to Germany, to Afghanistan. They had done so many things and worked with so much complicated equipment. I could barely understand them. They're very deeply entrenched in this culture, and yet the same themes of women not being allowed to do certain jobs, of hierarchy and oftentimes sexual harassment, which was another issue that we dealt with there, sexual harassment in the military, which is also a huge burning issue in Israel right now. Those themes emerged again and again, especially in these very hierarchical, closed worlds. Hollywood is another one. You don't think of it as hierarchical, but anybody who lives in Los Angeles and works in what they call the industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's a very specific planet, and yet they face so many of the same things: the sexual harassment on the job, the glass ceiling, or as we call it, the celluloid ceiling, and so on.
Why the celluloid ceiling? Oh, because it's
because film. Yeah,
right,
and in
yeah.
the military, it's the brass ceiling.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. Oh, clever. Any more questions?
So this is asking you about your US experience. Obviously, following this election, a lot of concerns. As a women's rights activist, what would be your biggest concern about what might be an area that needs focus, attention, a little bit of loving?
Yeah, so I think the biggest concern is actually an area I did not work on very much in my professional career, but it's women's reproductive health and rights, because I think that abortion and birth control are on the chopping block. We have the Health Care Act, where birth control is supposed to be free now in the United States, and they've already said they're going to try to roll that back. And of course that affects poor women is really who it affects. And in terms of abortion access, in the United States. It affects the people who live in the rural, far-flung areas, far from other states, people in Texas. Those are the people who aren't going to have access if clinics are shut down and all of the hard-won rights are taken away.
All right, Ariela Migdal, women's rights lawyer and campaigner formerly with the American Civil Liberties Union. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And also big thanks to Tammy Goldenberg, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast, there are many more where it came from. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick. Our co-host, Dalia Shendlin, will be back with us shortly. But in the meantime, don't forget to visit our website, telavivreview.org, like us on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.